Hello, and welcome to another episode in the Georgia Workers' Compensation video series. My name is Jason Perkins. I'm an attorney who specializes in handling Georgia workers' compensation cases. I created this series of videos to provide people who've been hurt at work in Georgia with helpful information about Georgia's workers' compensation laws and the benefits they should receive under those laws. Now, let's jump straight into today's topic. Today, I'd like to discuss with you how are Georgia workers' compensation payments made in a Georgia workers' compensation case. So what do I mean here? Well, when I'm talking about workers' compensation payments, I'm talking about that you have a Georgia workers' compensation case and your employer insurance company is paying you some sort of money. So some sort of workers' compensation benefit. The first question is, how are those payments made to you? Well, in Georgia workers' compensation claims, they can be made one of two ways. The first is by a check being mailed to you. So this is the default method. The other way that payments can be made is by electronic funds transfer, or what we might commonly call direct deposit. So many people receive their wages when they're working through direct deposit. But in a Georgia workers' compensation claim, payments are only made by direct deposit if both you and the insurance company agree to it. Otherwise, the default method is that the payment will be made by a check being mailed to you. Now, if you're out of work because of your injury, when do you start receiving wage loss payments? Well, in a Georgia workers' compensation case, the insurance company has 21 days from when you come out of work to make the initial wage loss payment to you. The reason they have this 21-day period is that the law gives them time to investigate your case and make a decision about whether they're going to accept it and start paying you workers' compensation benefits, or they're going to deny it. If they deny it, they should file a document known as a controvert, which is just a fancy word for a denial. Now, when the 21-day period comes up, and the insurance company can start paying you sooner, but they've got to pay all the benefits due up to 21 days, or they'll be late. Now, once that initial payment of benefits is made, then future payments should be made on a weekly basis. So it's going to feel a lot more like a paycheck at that point. Now, how much are the amounts that workers' compensation pays when you're out of work because of your injury? Well, that depends on how much you made when you were working. In workers' compensation in Georgia, there's this concept called average weekly wage. And that's based usually on what you averaged in the 13 weeks before you got hurt. And then the insurance company pays you 2/3 of that average weekly wage. But there is a maximum amount that you can draw per week. So if you were injured after July 1st of 2023, then the maximum amount is currently $800 per week as of the date that this video is being filmed. Now, that could go up in the future. Also, if your injury was before July 1st of 2023, then the maximum weekly amount is probably lower than that. It's going to depend on exactly when your injury was as to what maximum amount applies to your case. Now, as I mentioned, usually the insurance company is looking at that 13 weeks before your injury and determining your average weekly wage. But there are some situations where they might look at the wages of a similar employee. That's normally when you didn't work substantially the whole of the 13 weeks before your injury. So maybe you were just hired at this job and then got hurt, so you don't have a 13-week average to look at. And when there's not a similar employee available, then they'll look at something called your full-time weekly wage and determine what your average weekly wage should be. It's very important that your average weekly wage get calculated correctly, because that again determines how much in a weekly benefit you're going to receive from workers' compensation when you're out of work as a result of your injury. Now, are there other types of workers' compensation payments that you can receive from the insurance company other than the wage loss benefits for being totally out of work? Well, yes, there are a few others. So one common type is something called temporary partial disability benefits, which is often abbreviated as TPD. Temporary partial disability benefits are money that you receive when you're working light duty, but you're not making as much as you did before you got hurt. So if your injury restricts you or limits your ability to work in some capacity, but you can go back to work to a light duty job, there's many situations where you might be making less money because you're working less hours or because the job that they put you at just pays you less per hour. And so temporary partial disability pays you a percentage of the amount you're losing when compared to what your average weekly wage was before you got hurt. A second type of payment is permanent partial disability benefit payments. This is something where workers' compensation pays you if you have a permanent loss of function for your injury. So once the doctor gets you as good as you can get, you reach something called maximum medical improvement. If you're not as good as you were before you got hurt, they may give you a permanent partial disability rating. And that rating will entitle you to some weekly benefits from workers' compensation as payment for that permanent loss of function. Now, a third type of payment is a workers' compensation settlement. Now, settlement's not anything that you ever have to do. The insurance company can't force you to settle your case. But what settlement is a negotiated agreement between you and the insurance company, where the insurance company pays you a negotiated lump sum amount of money, and in exchange you give up your future workers' compensation benefits. Now, in a Georgia workers' compensation case, all workers' compensation settlements must be approved by a judge at the Georgia State Board of Workers' Compensation. Now, is the insurance company going to make the proper payments to you in your Georgia workers' compensation case? Well, that's difficult to say, but I can tell you from representing injured workers for a number of years that I often see payments not being made correctly. In fact, it probably happens in most workers' compensation cases that I handle. And there's three reasons that I commonly see where the insurance company doesn't make payments correctly. So one is that they just don't pay the benefits when they should. Now, this can be one of two situations. One is that they're paying you benefits, but they're paying them to you late. And in this situation, they should be paying you late penalties. There are certain late penalties assigned when workers' compensation benefits are paid. But insurance companies often don't pay these benefits even when they're paying late. So they pay the benefits, but they don't pay the penalties that they should. A second situation is that they just don't pay the benefits at all. So you get hurt at work, you're out of work, but they don't start paying you. Or you're getting benefits, but they suddenly stop. And they don't have a legal reason to stop your benefits. So you're not actually even getting the weekly checks that you should be getting. Another common situation is that the insurance company doesn't calculate your benefit amount correctly. I mentioned earlier average weekly wage and how that affects your workers' compensation check amount. So if the insurance company calculates your average weekly wage too low, your workers' compensation check is going to be less than it should be. And I often see this situation happen as well. Now, if you've got questions about whether your workers' compensation payments are being made correctly, I do provide free consultations in Georgia workers' compensation claims, so that can be a great way to get answers to those questions about that. I hope you found the information in this video helpful. If you have, please consider two things before you go. First, I'd really appreciate if you give this video a like or a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to this channel if you'd like to be notified of future videos in the Georgia Workers' Compensation video series. Second, if you've got workers' compensation questions, please reach out to get answers. I offer free consultations in Georgia workers' compensation cases. If you'd like to set one of those up, there's two easy ways you can do so. The first is by calling the phone number at the bottom of the screen, and the other is by reaching out to us to our website, which is www.perkinslawtalk.com. Just click on and submit the pre-consultation request form there, and a member of our team will reach out to you and get a consultation scheduled. I'd like to thank you again for watching this video today. I'd like to wish you the best of luck as you recover from your injuries.